Good.
We're good.
Yeah.
Well, do I start or do you start?
I guess you start because I'm not the one running the interview this time.
Wait, I don't know. I'm not used to that. I'm used to watching you start. So
I'm not used to it either, but that's kind of what we're doing, I think.
it's ruined already. Immediately,
Oh no, it's
I've ruined your
over.
Meet the Makers reputation. Hello.
Hi.
Hi. Hello everyone and welcome to That Guy's show. But I am Joan Rivers for the day, taking over for Carson. My name is Erin Rayberg, and I'm the executive director of the Elgin Fringe Festival, and we are turning the tables on artistic director Nick Mataragas. Did I say it right?
Yeah.
I can spell it without looking now, and I can say it without messing it up now. And it took a couple years, but
it's a big accomplishment.
I think so. I remember when I did it for the first time, I Facebooked you. I just wrote it for the first time without looking it up. So.
I remember that.
So you are the new Elgin Fringe Festival artistic director, and you immediately changed the whole format of the festival, just like year one, huh?
Just was like, you know what? We don't need to do in-person stuff anymore. We can just do it completely virtually. Yeah, that was interesting. Yeah, it was funny because, I've been a performer at the festival for a few years now. And you came up to me during the festival last year, and I was already working at Side Street by then. But you're like, hey, do you want to work on the festival next year? And I'm like, sure. And then that was kind of the extent of the conversation for the most part. And then a month and a half later, you're like, okay, so we'd like to make you the artistic director. And I was like, what? And then, yeah, of course, the year I started as artistic director, COVID happens. So that's always, a great start.
Have you now learned about us that do you want to be involved means start or run a festival, not like
Pretty much. It's one of those things where it's an all or nothing thing. Yeah.
Yeah, kind of. We're working on that, I guess. But you mentioned you'd already been working with Side Street Studio Arts, which of course were the producers of the festival. But I know you are a man of many gigs. What are all your gigs? How are you living as a working artist in another world and in our current world?
Oh, living. That's a good question. Like many artists, I do a lot of things to just stay, afloat while I also create my work. So I work at Side Street and I work with the festival, but I also work as a tour guide in Chicago. And I do graduation photography during years when, there are graduations. I've done Uber food delivery before, but I also, I have my own company that makes me negative money. So there's that as well.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And have you always done that kind of puzzle piece together like so many of us do? Or before all of that puzzle piecing, were you a normal human?
No, I brought this upon myself. I was a high school teacher for 10 years, and I was like, I'm just done. And I'm going to go be the artist I want to be now. And, a couple years and plenty of debt later, I'm like, yeah, I'm still okay with that.
What was the high school teaching straw that broke the camel's back there?
It built up because the system, I'm going to be honest, the system needs a lot of work. Our education system is pretty broken. But the last school I worked at was very much less about worrying about the how we were helping the students, and we're more about how do we not get attacked by the parents, which was tough. And then I was the yearbook advisor, and the principal at the time kind of undercut a decision on the yearbook without even consulting with me. And there were just a few moments where the school was very much we had discussions about some policies that I didn't agree with, but I was like, hey, I'm working for you. I'm gonna follow the policies even if I don't agree. And they had a real hard time processing that, like the idea that somebody could disagree but still do their job. And which anybody that's ever worked in a collaborative environment knows that's crazy, to think that you can't disagree. And so it just kind of all built up. And then I took a vacation. I went out to Yellowstone, and by the time I got back, I was like, yeah, I'm done.
You went to find yourself.
Kind of. And
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a road trip person, but that is something that happens on a road trip, is you kind of just have moments of clarity.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I have watched you teach. I am a teacher. I love teaching. I love working with kids. I know you enjoy that too. And I love how when you teach, you treat them with mutual respect and talk to them as if they are humans. I can't even imagine what it's like to be in schools with students and that sort of thing right now. Teachers deserve so much of our respect, but I miss that. I miss the teaching, and I miss watching others teach, because it's one of my favorite things to do. You can steal so much and glean so much from watching other people teach, because it's another performance. You know, when you're teaching, that performance switch flips, and you become that as well.
Yeah, and that's the one thing. Like, people ask me if I miss teaching, and I'm like, I don't miss the job. I don't miss all the extra. I miss the moments that happen in when teaching, where there's those moments where the kids, where everything just kind of clicks and things come together. And but I get to do stuff like that with Side Street too. So I mean, it's not like I don't have that anymore. And I also have, amazing creative outlets at this point. So um, it's okay that I'm not teaching anymore.
While you were teaching, were you exploring your other creative endeavors as well and maintaining
Yeah.
practices? Yeah.
I didn't sleep much. I was teaching, and I was doing improv, and I was writing, and I was actually working a writer's room at a theater I was working at, all at the same time as teaching, which is not easy. There were days where I would come home, change out of my teaching clothes, drive the 45 minutes to the theater, do a rehearsal or a writing group or whatever, and then literally just get home and crash on the bed, and then wake up like 4 hours later, you know?
Youth, right? That there's so much
Yeah.
youth, you know. I can't even imagine now. Can you, like, all these
No.
years later? I used to go in a week. I would teach at 8 different studios, you know, and sometimes in different days teach day. Who was that person? I don't know how they did
Right.
it.
Right.
It's amazing.
It was tough, and I knew I was hurting myself trying to do all of that at
Yeah,
once.
right, right. So you were improvising then. How did you get into improvisation, and where did that begin?
So I'm kind of dumb. I've when I was a kid, I loved
My
I've
next question, why are you so dumb? Is my next.
It's a good question. So when I was a kid, I loved comedy, like absolutely loved it. My two people I wanted to be when I was growing up were Bill Murray and Mel Brooks, hands down. Comedy Central came around when I was young. I'm dating myself saying that it started when I was a kid, but and one of
Both
the
sides
first
stand up, both.
right,
Yeah,
right, and one of the first things I saw on there was the original British Whose Line Is It Anyway, and I'm like, this is amazing. Um, and then I got older, and I did drama for a year in middle school, and it was very clicky, and I wasn't like one of the, like, my parents weren't like the parents that knew the drama teacher or whatever, and I'm like, I got just kind of disheartened by that, and kind of was like, I'm gonna go do something else. And I did. I went to art school, got my degree in graphic design, started teaching, and all of these things. But the whole time, over the years, people have told me, like, you should do performance, you should do something, and it was always there. And eventually, I was just finally in my early 30s. I'm like, you know, I'm I'm never going to be happy unless I at least try. And so I took an improv class, and then I took another one, and I started performing, and it was just one of those things, like, why wasn't I doing this the whole time?
I've had, especially since starting Side Street, so many conversations with artists who kind of came at it two ways, right? It seems like art is in the blood somewhere, somehow, from an early age, but had to put some reality, for lack of a better word, aside in order to pursue this. or have just stayed that course and seen so many of their peers kind of fall off because that reality sets in, and it seems that we can't live upstanding members of society lives and be an artist at the same time. And that's always interesting to watch unfold, because I think you could do both. Um, so, you said when you left teaching and that sort of thing, it was kind of this decision makes sense and it's time. I'm sure it was a difficult decision as well, but any looking back, any way to not live this, not creative lifestyle right now. I have no other way to, think about saying it.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Like, if I hadn't left, I would be miserable. And that was basically the final thing. Like, when it came to it, when I was reflecting, I'm like, it's not making me happy anymore. It's making me the opposite of happy. Um, and I had changed schools 2 years before I quit, and part of that was money, but also part of it was frustration with the first school that had changed over the years because of the world. Um, and I went to this new school, and immediately my first thought was, this is a good school, but it has no, like, it has no need or want to become a great school. And to me, that was kind of disheartening. And I think that's partly because I started doing improv, and one of the things that I've learned through improv is this idea of risk. This idea of there was a teacher who told us to dare to suck, and we kind of turned that into the idea of daring to fail, which is the idea that if you're going to do something great, it's not going to come out of, oh, this is a good idea. It's going to come out of something where you're like, I don't know if this is going to work, but if it does, it's going to be amazing. And so the school was one of those where it was like, this works, and this is what we're going to do. So there was no even concept of trying new things, or trying something outside of the box, which drove me insane. But yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Like, I enjoy. I've always had a rebellious nature, so I enjoy the little bit of risk, or a lot of bit of risk, depending on the situation that I have now when I do things. Versus teaching, I'm kind of like, at that point I was like, yeah, this is what it's going to be.
Yeah, I definitely thrive when there's just that level of pressure, which oftentimes in this life is financial pressure, right? It's the how
Mm-hmm.
am I going to find that last piece of the puzzle to be able to pay all these bills next month or whatever it is. Um,
Oh, you're supposed to pay those.
oh, that's that stack outside your door. Bummer, dude. That's why it's so cold and dark in your home.
Oh man.
That's not just your soul emanating out from you. um you're making me think, and especially with improv and that like dare to fail mentality and taking a risk, it is how oftentimes something I've been thinking a lot about all through the pandemic situation and off and on for years is the idea of the art we create is so very precious, and how not to hold on to it as this precious tiny baby bird, right? That
Mm-hmm.
we a have complete control over, or b can manage expectations and outcomes of, and that sort of thing. And how when we are willing to let it not be so precious, right, and let it go, that really amazing, wonderful, beautiful, thoughtful things can happen, and disastrous things can happen. And there's another place that's scary but way more exciting than when we're keeping our work for ourselves, or when we're being safe, so to speak, or not taking a chance on putting it out in the world.
Oh yeah, and I think that's interesting because, like, um, I find that a lot of people that write have trouble with that. In fact, one of my writing teachers that I've had was a guy named Howard Johnson, who's an amazing person, and he's done amazing things in his life. And he told us, and he didn't come up with the phrase, but he kind of turned this into our mantra during the class, which is "kill your darlings," which is the idea that nothing you create is sacred. It can all be changed. It can all be adjusted, and you should be okay with that. And if there's something in there that really is worth fighting for, then you're going to find it because you're willing to sacrifice this to keep that. And so, especially comedy writing, you have to be willing to do that and take in other people's input, because until, like, especially comedy, and I'm not knocking dramatic writing at all, but with comedy, it's all about that reaction, how other people are going to react. Until you put it in the room with other people, you can sit there and go, oh, this is hilarious. And then you put it out there and people will just be like, what? And if you're like, well, you don't get it, that's fine, it's what I've created, then it's never going to be successful. But if you're like, well, why is it not working? How do we fix this? How do we make this better? That's when the magic happens. Mm-hmm. And so it's that same idea of, we can't hold it too precious, because we have to be able to mold it and adjust it and make it into something more.
It's funny, because I was thinking about how over the years of getting to know you and your work, part of the shtick is we're not prepared, right? We'll talk more about your current show, but the middle section of that your current show, right, is you and Amanda talking about no one did the work, right? Mm-hmm. We haven't done the work. We're not prepared. A lot of like your social media marketing, maybe it was last year that like, this is the least rehearsed show in the history of Fringe or whatever, right? And so, of course, I'm assuming that there is so much preparation involved in the not looking prepared, but there's also the element of improv. So how are you considering that shtick that you all maintain, with all the years and now, months of work of what improv is and what you're making?
So that's interesting. So the least prepared show came out of some truth. I think it was last year's Fringe. We signed up for Fringe because we can't go a year without doing Fringe. We just can't. Both of us love it so much, and it's a great outlet for us. But we were also at the same time last year producing a horror show for the stage, and so we were trying to memorize for both shows. And we realized about a week out of Fringe that we were not going to be off book in a way that we were going to be happy for Fringe. And so we decided to go script in hand, which is interesting. And it was risky in the sense that, can the audience still take you seriously if you're not fully memorized and off book? But that came into it. And then we're like, well, let's just go with that. Let's steer into the skid and just be like, we're not prepared. We're going to work with that and use it in our improv. And it became a great way for us to interact in between pieces and how we transition from one piece to the next. And it totally worked with the improv, which is the idea of, we just didn't write the middle part of the show. And so it became a happy accident, and it works. And I think part of that is because of the chemistry that Amanda and I have, because we can play off of each other in that way of, really, you didn't do it, I didn't do it. And it just kind of worked. And so we've continued that into the virtual piece, where we did have our lines memorized for the most part. We did use cue cards on a couple pieces, but we still wanted to come up with that through line, because I think it works for the show.
I love that chemistry you and Amanda have, and I want to come back to that. But one part of bringing that together is interesting to me, because you're going to get both reactions, right? In our current world, we're talking about people who don't care enough, right? And how that is a type of person, a personality that people can put on, like, I don't need to do the work, and that kind of thing, right? And so I know when we are having a normal Fringe and in the room, as artistic director, you hear a lot of people's reactions to the show. And I heard people like, they still have their scripts. And I heard people say, I love that they had the scripts and we were in on the process. Like, you hear both sides of that, and you have to be willing to take that risk and hear if people are going to appreciate that or reject it, or find it funny or not, or whatever the case may be.
Right. And what allowed us to do it is the fact that we knew the pieces. It's all pieces that we've written. And so the acting was still able to be there, even though the paper was in our hand. And I think that's why the show worked, is because it was still something that we cared about and that we loved, and we still put, full effort into it. It's not that we didn't try. And I think there is that difference of effort that you mentioned. I mean, you got to do the work. That's all there is to it. Like, no matter what art or profession or whatever you do in life, if you're not doing the work, what's the point of doing it?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, so you and Amanda have great chemistry. How did you two find each other, and why do you have great chemistry?
Um, so we met the first day I took an improv class. She showed up late to class, which
Tradition carried on, I think.
yeah, that's her regular MO at this point. She's always late, which is fine. We know it, and it's a reliable lateness. It's not like an hour late. Um, and so we started doing improv together. And honestly, the first like year and a half, we didn't do a lot together. We were in the same groups, but like we just didn't do a lot together. And then I don't know what changed. I think the theater we were at was not, I'm going to be honest, it wasn't a great place to be a creative person. Um, a lot of the things that have been coming out about other theaters happened there as well. And but it also got a little strangely cliquey, and we at different times were kind of on the outside of some of those cliques, and so it just kind of happened. And then we started hanging out as friends, and we ended up coming to Fringe here at Elgin, and watched a couple shows, and we just started deciding, let's just do stuff together. And I think part of it is that we have chemistry as friends, and the way we talk to each other is very ridiculous sometimes because we're both very honest with each other just in person, and so that chemistry has overflowed into the performance aspect, and it works, and it's entertaining. And I think part of that is also we both believe in each other as performers, and you have to have that kind of respect and trust in the person you're with, and I think we have that.
Yeah, that's super clear. When you're building a show, are you doing it together? Thinking about that middle piece where you're like, you were supposed to write this section. Is that a reality on how you create? Go to your separate corners and come back together, or how do you create together?
So that's interesting. We tend to have our own ideas for stuff. I'm a bit more of an absurdist and a little bit more blatant and heavy-handed with my stuff. So if you watch the show, you can kind of tell which parts I've written and which parts she's written. And she's a little bit more. I don't want to say thoughtful because that makes me sound stupid. Well, that's fair. But
It's like her at least. So.
right. But she takes her time with pieces, and she's a little bit more deliberate. And so it's interesting because we'll come up with an idea. We'll each come up with ideas, and we'll start to write them out, and then we'll send them to each other or talk to each other, message each other, because we don't hang out as much right now as we normally would because of COVID and stuff. But so we'll message each other and talk about our ideas, and kind of help each other out. Like I'm like, if like we're stuck on something, I'm like, well, what if you do this? Or if she's like, well, this is just stupid. Just change this. I'm like, okay, I'll change it. And we kind of go from there, and we respect each other's work. And that's the thing. Like, the in this show specifically, there's the news broadcasts, which I'm not going to spoil what they are because they're ridiculous. But
one of my favorite lines in the show is something like with the Italian fight, like drink to kill the Italian spiders or whatever. I have it written down somewhere. I was like, that's the most absurd line of the Fringe, I think, and I love it.
Thanks. But she's literally like, and this has happened multiple times over the years, but she's like, I don't get it, but like I don't know why it's funny, but I can see how much you believe in it, and so we'll do it, and we'll see what happens, and then and then I feel like it works. And I've had sketches like that before where I've like written a sketch. I've literally written a sketch and presented it to the writers group at Memoriam, like just the people that worked with Memoriam, and they all just stared at me like completely silent, just like, what is that? And then like I'm like, it's gonna work, guys, I swear it's gonna work. And then we put it on stage, and people were just like, that was ridiculously funny. And I'm just like, oh good, because if it hadn't worked, everyone would have been like, we told you.
Right. We we did a show at St. Lou Fringe a few years ago, and it was supposed to be a funny show. The intention was humor for the most part. And the first show, the first night, not one freaking laugh anywhere, just not one anywhere. And the like 5 or 6 of us then went and had many drinks and were like, we're not funny. The show's not like, everyone should quit. And once you step outside of that vacuum, are you only funny to yourself and your homies, or is it actually gonna happen? Now luckily the next day it killed and it evened out the universe. But I'm thinking about creating with someone so well that you're like, even if I don't get it, I know that it's going to work. And in this moment where it's all in a vacuum, you have no clue if anyone is laughing at anything you're doing right now. How are you managing that? How are you not able to respond to those laughs? What was that like in the production of this, and in the just sitting while it's out in the world part of this?
So you mentioned some really great things there, and you mentioned you bombing at St. Lou. We did three.
Bombing.
Okay, fair enough. But
you're right. You're right.
We did 3 shows at Fringe last year here, and our first show was great. Our last show was great. Our middle show completely bombed, and it was the one where like full of other Fringe artists and people we knew, and we were just sitting there and like seeing them going like, and it reminds me of this thing about like when a show.
I'm sorry, it just makes my guts hurt thinking about it.
It was rough, and we were both we finished and we were just like, well, that was terrible. But there's this saying that Susan Messing, who's a very famous, very amazing improviser, she says, and the one thing you can't do on stage is start to think, I suck, we suck, this sucks, because then the show will suck. And it's such a hard thing to get out of, because as soon as things start to not hit, you're like, oh God, and you start to shrink in on yourself. And so it's one of those things that I think it happens to all performers, where you just have a bad show and it happens. Now, going from live to video, that's really tough. I've done some video work before, so I have a little bit more experience, but Amanda was fairly new at being on camera. And so, there was a lot of like just mechanical things that were harder for performance wise. But also I think the scripted stuff was a little bit easier because we know how to deliver stuff. And so I think that worked out okay. Plus I could enhance it with like a stupid graphic or just something popping up or sound effect or whatever afterwards when I'm editing it. But the improv was the hard part. We actually did 2 improv sets. We recorded, it was the last thing we recorded, and we were actually in Kentucky on doing the Bourbon Trail because we're taking a vacation after this. And we still hadn't done the improv. And so we're recording it at our Airbnb. And we record the first improv set, and we just both go, that was atrocious. And so we're like, we take an hour, have a drink, relax, and do it again. But even the second one, we liked the second set. We really enjoyed it. And actually, we had to cut part of it for time, which was too bad. But improv is something that is so, feeding off the audience is so important, because part of how you steer the ship with improv is how they react to things. Like if somebody loves something, then you're like, okay, this is something we can explore more. And without that, it's a lot more of a free fall. Like it's already a free fall, but it's more so because you're like, I don't know what's happening. I don't know what is working and what isn't working. I'm just here in the moment, which is such a weird, freaky thing.
Knowing there were a few tries it's making me think of it like game tape. Like, did you look at it in like a self-critical way? Did you watch it and say, well, we want to try this and this, or what's reading to the camera, or how are we going to improve the next round?
For the improv, no, we just knew it was bad. For the other stuff, I mean, we did multiple takes on everything. We actually reshot a little bit during the Purgatory sketch, or not sketch, a piece. It's not, that one's not comedy, um, but a lot of it was, you know, multiple takes, which is, like I said, something that she wasn't used to. Also, we didn't shoot everything in perfect order, which was also something that kind of was like, well, how do we stay within our characters, emotional arc and still be able to do that? So that was, an interesting thing, but it was a lot more like just learning as we went, because none of us were filmmakers before this. I had done on camera work, but I'd never shot. I've only edited a couple YouTube videos, so like it was a lot of trial by fire, and we kind of, we had to go with what we had. There wasn't really a lot of time or space for reshoots because, everything was shut down, and we're doing this and it's due in a month. We just got to get it done. So it was a really cool experience, but also a huge learning experience. Yeah.
I really enjoyed in the show, which is the first time I've been able to see your show. So last winter we had tickets to a non-Fringe show, and snow came, and when we normally have Fringe, I try to see all the out-of-towners and then save local. And so this is the first time I've been able to see the show, which is great. And finally, anyway, one thing I really liked about it was that mix of at home in the living room, so to speak, to different scenes and scenarios, some of which I recognize, right? But the tonal shifts that you don't always get at a live improv show or many improv shows. There were, and I want to talk more about the Purgatory sketch, but in most of your shows, do we see this kind of roller coaster ride of balance of comedy and drama too?
That is kind of our signature for In Memoriam. I think most of Memoriam's other productions, it's either comedy or dramatic or whatever it is. But one of the things that we talked about when we decided to do this show together, because we've done sketch shows at Fringe before, we've done podcasts at Fringe before, but we wanted to do this 2-person show, which kind of turned into a 3-person show because Dave's there to play music and he's fantastic at it, and he's got an amazing song in his show. Is we wanted to highlight not just our range, but the range that the group can do. And so we wanted to balance that. And I'm a firm believer that comedy and drama are 2 sides of the same coin, and you can't have one without the other. And so it's super important to balance that out. And it's an interesting struggle because last year, one of the hardest hitting things that we had was I had a monologue in the show originally that talked about my depression. And it was very heavy, and we realized that it was just a little too heavy to balance out with the comedy, because it was like, everyone's just kind of like, oh God, and then we're like, hey, we're gonna be funny now, and so finding that balance is an interesting thing to do. And I think also placement wise, like, where does this go in relation with these other things? Because there's a rhythm to putting together a show like that, where it's multiple pieces, and you have to figure out that rhythm and figure out where things go. And so that's another challenge of that. But I think In Memoriam, I think as a show has to have at least a little bit of both.
You bring up your third member. Tell us a little bit about how he comes in with the music. And right, there's a beautiful song in there. Not that the other 2 weren't beautiful, but there's a beautiful song sandwiched in there. And how does he come into play with the creative process in the group?
So Dave is he is an incredibly creative person who has never been really a performer, and that's okay. He's performed on some podcasts and he does great at it, but he's not like an on-stage performer. And last year when we decided to do In Memoriam, one of the things we wanted to do was musical improv, and you have to have somebody accompanying it, or musical improv is just, well, it's already weird, let's be real. And especially for a guy who can't sing like myself, it's important to have that accompaniment. And so we asked him to accompany a couple of the shows last year at the festival. And it was one of those things where he we want to give him more opportunities, and because he's part of our group, and we want to make sure everybody in our group has opportunities, but at the same time, like, we all have our things, and we wanted to make sure that we're like, Dave, this is partly yours too. You get to be, this is something that you can have ownership of as well. And so we started to bring that in. He did a show during our Winter Fringe called he did a song during the Winter Fringe called Shoe Fetish, which was amazing and hilarious. And I remember Tanner sitting in the back like dying about it. And so that was one of the things, like our first year, like it was, we advertised it as a 2-person show. It was me and Amanda in the image, and that was it. And so I think that was the one thing this year. We wanted to make sure that people felt like, even though he wasn't in every piece, that he was an equal part of the show. So like all the artwork includes him. And, even when he wasn't in the pieces, he was the guy shooting most of the time on camera. So like, it's one of those things where he is a true collaborative partner on the piece.
That song, along with the dramatic and comedic balance, that song is even another place that kind of balances out the show as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of that purgatory piece, I found it very touching and very beautiful. I loved its placement in the show. It was a surprise, and then a narrative to hold on to, and especially in this moment, very relatable. It made me think and question and wonder two things. One, what is comedy's place right now? What are we allowed to laugh at? What I know personally, things that have made me laugh in the past do not make me laugh right now, and who knows if they ever will again. And right, and then into this sort of purgatory piece felt very natural and real and right for this moment. So again, talking about that balance and creating this work along with that comedy, and we're using comedy right now, but it feels so different of an experience than it has. And so, I really like the juxtaposition. But Nick, what are we allowed to laugh at right now?
You're allowed to laugh at pretty much anything you want to. I mean, as a human being, but that's an interesting point. I think we're at a time in this world where comedy is it needs to fill one of the roles that it fills at different times. Sometimes comedy is just there to escape and to laugh at silliness and whatever, and sometimes it's there to be a sword. And I think right now that's what comedy needs to be, is a weapon of because we're in such a weird, strange, dark, frustrating, infuriating, depressing time, that the comedy that comes out of it has to empower us as people. And I think, one of the things that I've said, and I actually, when I interviewed Krish Mohan at the beginning of the festival, I talked about comedy is supposed to make fun of the oppressors, not the oppressed. And right now, that needs to be as pointed as possible. Satire is such an important thing, and not just like, light, like fluffy satire, like, oh, he talks funny. That's the satire. Like, go hard into it. And I think that's something, like, at least in my work, I try to do, is to be just very pointed. I think the news piece, as ridiculous and silly as it is very pointed. And I think, and to the point where I'm saying things that as a real person I wouldn't say, because that's the rhetoric of people of a certain kind. And I'm like, this is insane, and I'm pointing that out, and it's ridiculous, and we allow it to happen. And so it's one of those things that comedy gives perspective in that way, and it points out the ridiculousness, the fallacy of certain thought processes. And I think that's where it needs to be right now. Like, in 10 years, if things are great, then we can go back to just being like, oh, fart jokes, whatever. But that's not what we need right now. What we need is that weapon.
Yeah, I mean, we don't laugh as easily, right? And I do think that, especially in those news bits, it does take that heightened level of absurdity to for me to be willing to feel the silly, right? I'm pretty open to silly as a human being. And right now, that silly door is just shut tighter than it normally is. And so, like that Italian, Italian spider joke, that felt silly and absurd and of course pointed and targeted and real at the same time.
Right. And it was that the Italian spiders thing is seriously, it's just using people's reactions to COVID and just showing what it would be like if we were talking about something that was tangible. And like how ridiculous people's reactions are to it because they don't see it, so they don't understand that it's a thing. And I mean, it was literally, that was very easy to write because it was literally just taking the things people are saying and putting it into this context and showing how absurd that is.
Yeah. And then I think that's part of what makes the tonal shift into this purgatory piece so successful. Right, the color on the screen changes, the sounds change, the energy level changes, and you're immediately sucked into that. And then there's a narrative arc here, a dramatic narrative arc that I felt that you all did very successfully and have a definite talent for. And I wanted to know what was going to happen. And I enjoyed, was entranced by the imagery on the screen. And I mean, I love a fashion montage, right? That was, I had like 3 favorite moments, and that was one of them. And I actually went back a couple seconds at one point to be like, I could use a few more seconds of Nick turning around in his American flag shirt and bandana. But tell me about the creation of that piece. It was just really striking and really beautiful.
So that's thank you. That's a lot of Amanda. She wrote that piece, and she actually wrote it originally for the horror show that we did. And one of the things that we talked about doing is taking pieces that we wrote that we really care about and putting them in this show for us to perform ourselves. And so that's part of how In Memoriam came to be. Was we've done a few pieces over the course of a year and a half with this show where it's like, this is just something that we want to revisit and be a part of ourselves. And Purgatory was one of those. And I remember her writing it and immediately going, this has to be made. This is beautiful and sad and amazing. And we argue all the time about who the actual protagonist in the piece is, because I say it's about Death's arc, and she says it's about Agatha's arc. And I don't think either of us are right or wrong. I think it's both, and that's something that's beautiful about it. And that was an interesting one to turn into film because it had to feel like film. If we were going to present that, it couldn't have been like the living room, just reading it, because it's so human and moving that we needed to give it its full credit. And it has its ups and downs, and it has those beats in it, which I think are important. And you mentioned the montage of changing clothes, which we shot right here where I'm sitting, basically. And it's funny because it was just literally me throwing a bunch of weird random stuff I had in my closet into a bag and bringing it with me. And so she had no idea what I was going to be wearing. So some of those reactions were pretty authentic. But yeah, shooting that is different. And we did talk about, changing the saturation level on it, making sure it felt different. And also the difference in the beginning where the saturation is lower versus the end scene, which it's full saturation again. But that's a hard job because, like, once again, we've performed that on stage, and you can, even though you're not getting laughs, you're still feeling the audience's reaction. And so the camera can be very cold. And so we weren't even sure how well we performed it when we were recording it because of that. Even though we're still feeding off of each other, there's also like that lack of the intakes and the tension that you can feel in the audience building it. So it's one we were really like critical of ourselves and really worried about how that would come off.
Yeah. I was in for it. It's interesting to hear that you've done it live before. Has it been done live in the context of improv and comedy then in a
Yeah,
similar way to this setup? And
yeah.
ha, so I feel like for the most part, fringe audiences are no go into any show knowing they're going along for a ride, right?
Mhm.
And it could be a show that goes up and down and everywhere, or it could be a straight improv show. How do non-fringe audiences respond to that? Are they willing to go along for the ride? And with that juxtaposition of comedy, how does that work out?
I think so. I think they're willing to go along for that ride. I think as long as they don't come in thinking everything is going to be comedy, uh, that helps. But also, good improv can take you to places that are touching and or dark or dramatic. It doesn't always have to be making somebody laugh hysterically. And I think um, that's something that most audiences are more savvy to than we give them credit to be. Though sometimes you do get the audiences just like yelling dildo for improv suggestions the entire night, which has happened way too many times for me to count in my
Clever,
career.
clever.
Yeah. If you yell that, you're not being clever. It's been done. But I think, yeah, that's one of those things where you have to respect the audience. And there's a thing in performance, especially in improv, where they say play to the height of your intelligence, and that's because if you're not playing to the height of your own intelligence, you're not giving the audience credit enough. And if they're too dumb to get the stuff, so be it. But you shouldn't be like, well, I don't know, I'm playing, out here, at a steel mill. I can't be witty. That's not fair to the steel workers then. And I'm just using a steel mill as an example, but that play to the height of your intelligence, do the things that you think are going to work, and don't discount your own work because you don't think they're going to get it or they're going to be mature enough to be able to make that transition. Because for the ones that are, it's going to be so much more rewarding for those audience members. And audience reactions are in fact infectious. So if one person starts to laugh at something, or one person starts to be moved by something, people catch on.
Yeah, I love coming from a dance background. I love putting movement improv in non-dance spaces. It's just like when we have
Mhm.
Going Dutch here in town, and when artists go out on the street and you watch those, not audience reactions, just pedestrian reactions, and they're either trying not to see it, or more than willing to watch and be invested in whatever this outcome is going to be.
Right. And yeah, and that's because you're giving them that opportunity to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so why fringes? Why do you like fringes, and why do you keep coming back to fringe festivals?
It's our chance to really do whatever we want. And I think that's the big thing with the fringe festivals. And like I said, we started by watching shows here at the Elgin Fringe Fest one year. We came out because I did an improv jam that week, and one of the people that was there that I'd never seen before was like, "Oh yeah, I'm here in town because I'm doing the Elgin Fringe Festival. Come see my show." And I did, and their show wasn't the best, but we saw some other shows that were really great, and we're like, we should do this because it's literally a blank canvas. You can do whatever you want. It doesn't have to fit certain parameters, and it doesn't have to be clean. And I don't mean like clean like dirty talk, but like clean like it can be messy, it can be whatever. And so it's like our chance to let our hair down. Like, usually when you produce a show, you're like polish, 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 and you're trying to make it perfect. And well, you try to make it perfect, even though perfect doesn't exist. That is something I firmly believe in, is that you keep trying to be perfect, but you also have to understand that it's not going to be. But with fringe festivals, it's a lot, to me, it's a lot more of that kind of like Wild West of performance, where it is what it is. We did a show, our second year performing, we did a sketch show here, and uh, you know, for whatever reason, did three performances. The first two we had good sized audiences, and then our last night we had 2 people in the audience, and we're just like, let's just take it off the rails and just go wherever it goes with these sketches. And we had a blast, and it was cathartic, and it was weird, and it was amazing, and only 2 people got to experience it, and that was a great thing because of how just insane it was. And you don't get that with regular shows. You don't get that in a regular theater. You don't get that with people that are like, I paid $20 to come see this show about potatoes or whatever. You don't get that, and so that's what makes Fringe special to me.
I miss that camaraderie of it so much. I'm loving being able to see every show. I'm inspired by the work the artists are submitting and creating in all the wonderful ways, right? But that Fringe Central, or that going to upstairs of Elgin Public House and being close to the improv show and the other artists and audiences, I just ache for that. Like that, you and Pixie yesterday were talking about, that just kind of void of applause or engagement. And as a producer, my the hole in my soul right now is people tight in a room, maybe a little sweaty, up close to the art and the music and all of that. So I'm while totally inspired with the festival, missing so much of that, that you get even when there are only 2 people in the room, and you have that experience, that shared experience together.
It is. It really is. And I also have been inspired by all the shows I've watched. Like, it's amazing to see how each artist has adapted differently to the format change and what they've done. And also, and this is the thing that's amazed me about this year's festival, whether or not a show was planned before the shutdown or not, everything feels timely this year. Everything feels like it has to do with what's going on in some way. And that is kind of the beauty of art, and the fact that no matter what we are, where we are as artists and what we're planning on doing, our world and our experiences influence what we make. And even if you're not doing that intentionally as an artist, even if you're not doing a sketch about spiders that are a metaphor for COVID, you're still doing something that feels like it's part of right now. And that's amazing. And it's terrible that we're missing the live audiences and the interactions, and just even running, talking to somebody after the show and them going, I really enjoyed what you did. We're also getting some really amazingly timely art, and that's something else that we should always keep in mind.
That's an excellent point. And as we've been talking about the Fringe Committee, of how we can keep some of the chunks of what we've had to do this year, when hopefully next year we're able to be in those spaces with each other again, right? So keeping the accessibility of this virtual thing, or for both artists and audiences, right? We can have a virtual component that includes artists that can't come to Elgin, and vice versa. So there's that inspiration level on the production side as well.
Oh, for sure. And I think that's one of the things that's just true for the world is change brings ingenuity, and challenge brings ingenuity. And we'll never be back to what we were, which is okay, because everything's supposed to change and grow. That's how the world works. That's how we grow as a society. And so that's okay. That doesn't mean that we won't be back in person, because we will, because I would rather die than not be able to perform in front of an audience, at some point. But yeah, if we do these things, if we adapt and then we don't use that new knowledge, that new thing that we've built at all, that would also be just wrong.
So are you optimistic? Is there optimism in there?
So this goes back to me and Amanda as well. I'm the optimist. She's the pessimist, or she doesn't say she's a pessimist. She says she's a realist, to be fair. But I'm the optimist. So I'm always like, yeah, things will work out eventually. That's not easy right now. My optimism only goes so far, but I'm optimistic that art will continue and things will eventually come back to being. We'll be able to be in front of each other at some point. I'm not the kind of optimist that's like, oh yeah, in 3 months it'll be fine and we'll be great. But I'm the kind of optimist that we'll get there. I think that humanity and society tend to trend in the right direction in the long term, whether we have setbacks or not. Sometimes those setbacks are very large and last, a good amount of time, 4 years or more sometimes. But I think that we still, on the whole, do better than we did. So I think that, yeah, I mean, that optimism is there. It's not like, bright, shiny optimism right now. It's kind of angry, begrudging optimism, but it's there.
I can picture that angry, begrudging optimism character.
Mm-hmm.
So we've worked together for a few years now, and this is the first time we've been able to have a conversation like this. This is,
Right.
bits and pieces of this conversation, but this is another part. I know it was a lot of work for you on your end, but as the executive director, I'm saying we keep the Meet the Makers series.
I think we should keep it in some sort of form. I really enjoyed the work is a lot. It is a lot of work to do this series, but I enjoy getting to know the artists more, and I hope the people that have watched it have enjoyed getting to know the artists more, because I think that was one of the things that came out of missing that live performance. And in fact, I mentioned this with my interview with Captain Ambivalent, Dan Beamer. He said during a meeting, a virtual meeting, like, what about the fact that we don't get to talk to the audience members after the show and get to see what they thought or how they felt? And that's where this came from, was that idea of how do we have that interaction with the artists anymore? And so, I think this is something that has been fulfilling for me, and I hope it's been fulfilling for the artists and for the people watching. And so I'd love to keep doing it, in some form or another as we continue on.
I'm about halfway through the interviews. They're kind of stacked up, but each one is bringing new thoughts and inspiration and insight and even gossipy bits, right, that are fun to know about these individuals that I've known for a while or just met in passing through email.
Right.
So that's really fun. So thank you for doing all those. Nick, I like you. I think you are smart and entertaining and a proper weirdo, which is the highest compliment I can give. And I thoroughly enjoyed the show and the work of your collaborators, and I'm looking forward to so much more. So thank you for your time, and thank you for your work and all of the other shit we do together all the time. Thank you for all of that. And we're lucky to have you in these parts. So
I thank you for letting me do all of this and having faith in some weird dude who's just like, yeah, nothing's ever going to work out, but we'll still do it. Like for to put somebody in charge of anything that talks like that is a risk, and so I appreciate you guys taking that risk.
But of course, you have one more interview. When's your
yes.
one?
So on Monday at 7:30, I will be interviewing Nolan Webster. That'll be the final interview of the 2020 Meet the Makers series for the Elgin Fringe Festival. Nolan has a fantastic magic show on ElginFringeFestival.com. Watch his show ahead of time if you want. It's only $5. Watch all the shows for $50. All that money goes back to the artists. Please watch it. It is amazing to see all of these people put so much effort into everything that they're doing, and it's worth much more than the $5 that it costs you.
Yeah. So to say goodbye to all of that in a proper fringe fashion.
Mm-hmm.
Am I okay here?
Looks fabulous.
All right. Thank you, Nick, very much.
Thank you, and thank you all for watching.
Thank you all. Bye, everyone.